Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in San Diego Soccer History. I'm John Cross, along with Dylan Wilson. And Dylan, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing all right. It has been a bit of a disappointing weekend in terms of football for me, but that's okay. I remain optimistic.
Yes, start of the season, you're either in, very joyous moods when things start off or not so much.
I can't wait for the
But
Premier League season to start next weekend.
yeah. um, as we were talking about just before we started the stream, we had a lot of things we could talk about here in the opening of some current event kind of things, like the sanctions for Argentina, Mexico deciding, to not do promotion and relegation with their first division, um, the UEFA CONCACAF Alliance for the Nations League, and some of the news that's coming out from that. But I think we'll narrow it down to just a couple of things. I'd love to get your thoughts because I have some. That's the reason we're going to talk about this. Is I'd love to get your thoughts on the leaked MLS playoff format um, that will be coming soon. I don't know if it's when they do their sprint season or if it's when they do switch to their fall to spring season, but upcoming playoff change sometime after this season. What are your thoughts?
Well, I haven't looked into it too specifically, but I understand that it'll be 20 teams and they're doing away with the 3 game series and moving to a legitimate home and home 2 leg playoff sort of format. Is that correct or vaguely
Not
correct?
not quite. Getting rid of the best of 3 opening series. But what they're leaning to, well, I guess first of all, when the news broke, there was certainly lots of consternation maybe by lots of people out there. I think the fact that the one of the places that uses this playoff format heavily is Australia. And the article from The Guardian pointed to um, the AFL, Australian Rules Football. Um, but it's also used in a lot of their soccer leagues as well, though I don't think the A League actually uses it. But it's a variation on the Page McIntyre format. We actually talked about in another podcast we had done when we looked at the Australian football pyramid. And I really like this playoff system because it favors, if you're not going to do promotion relegation, it gives a lot more credit and weight to how you finish the regular season. Um, so you, the seeding is a bit different, especially in the opening rounds. But again, if you're going to be Major League Soccer and you have no especially short-term plans to do any promotion relegation, who knows what will happen down the road. Um, and you want to give more weight to the games that happen during the season, I actually really like this, again, variation on the Page McIntyre playoff format that has been in use around the world, especially in Australia, for more than 100 years. Um, but if you do a simple 4-team setup, what it means is your top 2 teams play each other. And then whoever wins that is automatically in the final. But whoever loses will play the winner of the 3rd and 4th place match. So if you finish higher in the standings, it's almost a double elimination for some teams. Um, they've, of course, extended this same kind of idea out to 20 teams. And, you know, I think that's a bit extreme when you get to 20 teams. But again, if you have 30 teams in your league and you're not going to have any jeopardy at the bottom of the table, it has to come, well, not that the jeopardy has to come from somewhere. You have to give those bottom teams hope that they can do something towards the end of the season. Otherwise, those games kind of become meaningless. So you know that I'm a big pro rel advocate, but I think this is quite possibly the best playoff format MLS ever could have come up with in terms of making where you finish in the season have a little more weight and doing what they're trying to do is to maximize who has playoff games and teams that get in there, because that's where the bigger money is made through advertising, attendance, everything else. Um, so under that business model, I think this is a great playoff format. I don't know that it will make me watch any more MLS games, but I think I'm just happy to see an American League actually make an attempt at adopting this playoff format and see how it plays out.
Okay, well, I'll need to do a little more reading into it then. I found a very confusing graphic just right now
Yeah,
as
yeah, the
I've been
graphics aren't
Googling.
necessarily helpful out there.
So I'll need to do a little more digging. But yeah, as a rule, I kind of am generally opposed to ever expanding playoffs. I think it cheapens the regular season, generally speaking. Again, I'll need to read into this a little bit more, but I would point to baseball, which is the sport throughout my life I've probably known the best, and I think the expansion of playoffs has done nothing but cheapen them, basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, having 2/3 of your league or thereabouts making the playoffs that's a tough sell for me. Again, I'll need to look into it a little further, but
I
I don't.
100% agree.
Yeah, if I'm reading this graphic I'm looking at correctly, I don't mind this. Again, like as you said, if they're not going to do pro rel and if they're committed to having this many teams in the playoffs, this is probably the best way they could go about it if I'm reading this correctly. But I just, like I said, as a rule, expanding the playoffs to a point where more than half the teams are making it just feels silly to me.
I agree, and I've never liked that about our in the US ever expanding playoffs, because it does make, especially the way we tend to do playoff structures in the United States, it tends to make the regular season um, not nearly as important, because you don't have to do as much to make it in to the actual playoffs. There's not really a reward, especially the way we do it is simple knockouts. So it might be a series, but top rated team is pitted against whatever your lowest rated team is, but they could get knocked out right away. Some people love that idea, but if you have a playoff format like that, then it really doesn't matter how you do across the course of the season. It really only matters how you come together at the end of the season. It's almost like a whole bunch of preseason, and then the last third of the season, you really need to tighten things up. And if you do, you could probably make a big run in the playoffs and do well and maybe win the title. Um, but it does make a lot of the games relatively meaningless. And 20 teams out of 30 is just, I don't like that. But if you're going to do the MLS model, I think that this probably works best for them in the long run. So
I think
we'll see
something that
how it
kind of
plays out.
irritates me too is I've the little bit of like discourse, quote unquote, that I've seen around this topic is like discussion of does this better or worse than the previous format help to determine who the actual best team is this year, not just the hottest team, which is, a very common like argument made against a playoff system, i.e., that it doesn't tell you who the actual best team is necessarily, but who was the most informed team come playoff time. And that I just find that discussion to be very silly because, like, you're basically reinventing the wheel. If you want to know who the best team was this year, make the winner the team that was best this year, like in a league
Right.
format. It's very much that simple. So I think that's part of the reason I haven't even bothered to look into this any further, because it just I scratched the surface and saw a rehashing of this old, again, quote unquote, discourse that I
Yeah.
cannot be bothered to entertain. So I'll look into it a little further then. But yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
All right. Well, let's switch to something that's a little more up our alley in terms of doing soccer history. The National Soccer Hall of Fame. The final ballots came out for the player ballot, the veteran ballot, and the builder ballot. So let's take a couple minutes and talk about those. I think in the rundown, the link is there. If you have that, you can look at the actual names on there. Um, so we'll look at the player ballot first. There are 20 names on the player ballot. 9 of those 20 are first timers. So it's the first year they have been up on this player ballot. 2 to 3 players can be elected for those who aren't terribly familiar how the Hall of Fame voting works. There's 20 names on the ballot. A voter can vote for up to 10, but they don't have to vote for 10. They can vote for up to 10. And then the 2 players that have the highest vote totals, as long as they were represented on at least 50% of the ballots, then they will be inducted. And then a third might be inducted if they're the third highest vote total, but they've been on at least 75% of the ballots. And that's usually in a year where, the vote's not really split. There's 2 or 3 really solid candidates, so they're on almost everybody's ballot, and they make it in. So we have 20 names on the player ballot. Are there, well, I guess I should probably read them, go through just for our listeners who may not have heard the names on the list. Let me go through them quickly in alphabetical order. Ozzy Alonso, Josie Altidore, Michael Archer. If you're not familiar with that name, Michael Archer, because he's from the Power Chair Football Association. Kyle Beckerman, Matt Beasler, Michael Bradley, Stephanie Lopez Cox, Dwayne De Rosario, Julie Ertz, Jermaine Jones, Robbie Keane, Ali Krieger, Samantha Mewis, Jessica McDonald, Oguchi Anewu, Megan Rapinoe, Amy Rodriguez, Natalie Russo-Dickey, also a Power Chair athlete, Diego Valeri, and Graham Zusi. Now, any thoughts about the list, Dylan, or any names that jump out to you that you think should be in?
I
think might be
truthfully,
shoe-ins.
I don't know enough about all of the people involved to say who deserves or doesn't. I will say in typical American soccer fashion, the voting process or ballot tabulation process seems unnecessarily confusing and convoluted. But again, that's American soccer for you. One player who does jump out to me was one of my favorites early on in my soccer journey was Oguchi Onyewu. Really dominant in the air. Was a very physical defender, and I enjoyed watching him play. And has one of the most fun names I've ever heard. So he was an early favorite of mine.
Yeah, I think this list is tough. I'm looking down at the list here, and there's a lot of names here I remember, especially if you look at both the U.S. men's and the U.S. women's national team pools. We've got some other players who had big MLS careers like Dwayne De Rosario and Robbie Keane. But for most of the names on here, there's no one name that really, really jumps out ahead of everybody else. Like, oh, they have to be in. I think this is one of the hard things about Hall of Fame voting. Like, what criteria are you using? Because depending how you weight it, is international experience worth more than what you do at the club level, or do you look at everything? Really hard to make some distinctions between some of these people who are on the list. I will say, if I were to have a vote, Michael Archer from the Power Chair competition, he would definitely be on my list. He would be an automatic one that I would select. Didn't know much about him until very, very recently, because I think he might have been on there. I don't know, maybe in a semifinal ballot. I remember his name came up before, and I wasn't aware of who he was. And I went in to look up, his stats, and he's, kind of like the Landon Donovan of Power Chair football. So if we're looking at all these different athletes and looking at someone who is really at the very top of their game, to me, he ought to be a shoe-in. But it's only been recently that we've started to allow some of these athletes from our other soccer competitions that we recognize, beach soccer, deaf soccer, all those, to actually get on our Hall of Fame ballot. But has a pretty impressive stats and World Cups he's won, and everything else with the Power Chair football team. So I think now that I know about him, that's the name that would stand out. But I think for most people, they probably think of Hall of Fame in terms of their national team careers. And I don't know if that's, well, I guess if we do that for Michael Archer, he ought to be a shoe-in for that. But that would probably be the only name that stood out to me.
I think in the United States too, Hall of Fame kind of takes on a slightly different connotation than it might in the rest of the world as well. Because especially, sports with the very famous halls of fame, baseball especially, like, there's not really a national team to speak of for the vast majority of
Right.
that history. So I think the average American sports enjoyer, for lack of a better term, might conceptualize of a Hall of Fame a little bit differently. But yeah, I'm all for alternative sports inclusion. I think that's very cool, and winning a World Cup. What else? What else do you need to say?
Yeah, when I see names like Dwayne De Rosario and Robbie Keane, I think in MLS terms, they should probably be in some kind of MLS Hall of Fame. I don't know. MLS doesn't do a Hall of Fame, do they?
I have no
Um,
idea.
yeah, I was just thinking about that, and I don't think they do anything. And then, but in terms of U.S. Soccer Hall of Fame, I think some of those great players sometimes are at a disadvantage. I mean, I think those are two of the best players that have played in MLS, not the two best, but they're up there. And what they did for their respective teams that they played on. Um, but when you're doing a U.S. Soccer Hall of Fame, they're also kind of limited because they didn't play for the national teams here. Dwayne De Rosario's Canada. So yeah, it's hard to combine all these groups. I really, if we are going to have this many people recognized, also, um, I think maybe the Hall of Fame might need to consider expanding the number of people who get in, because just if you look at national team, you have multiple members of the U.S. men's national team and multiple members of the U.S. women's national team, and only two are guaranteed to get in, even from those groups, depending how the ballots go. So that's tough. That's a, I think, a fairly wide open um, ballot this year, and if too many get split, there's a chance we might not have any player ballots if you don't get enough people on 50% of the ballots. All right, let's switch over to the veteran ballot, and this is the only one where we have any kind of San Diego connection, and that's Ali Wagner, who played for the San Diego Spirit in 2003. She was the #1 draft pick into the WUSA that year. But she's up there with a couple other U.S. women's national team members, Tiffany Roberts and Lori Fair. And we have some other people, David Beckham, Chico Borja, which is a great indoor player, Ken Cooper Sr., who was big in the NASL days, and then into the indoor soccer where he did coaching. Um, we have Lori Fair, Quentin Mathis, Francis Farberoff, who's a beach soccer player, also one of the legends of beach soccer. Tiffany Roberts, Homare Sawa, Japanese international who played over here in the WUSA and I think possibly in the WPS as well. Tattoo, great indoor player, and then Ali Wagner rounding out the list. And this is one of those things for me, sentimentally, for San Diego connections, it's Ali Wagner. But if I look at it from another standpoint, I think Francis Farberoff from, beach soccer legend, also one of the ones at the absolute top of his game, ought to be in there. And then when I start looking at the others, I don't know, I could split them here and there, but I also just don't see, I don't know, for me, I just don't see David Beckham. It wouldn't surprise me if he wins, but I just don't see David Beckham on there for his handful of years in Major League Soccer.
I would agree with that. I think, though, I would be very unshocked to see him get in on basically name recognition alone. Um, yeah, I don't. I think that would be a bit of a miscarriage of justice.
Yeah, and I mean, so again, it's tough because only one person gets in on the veteran ballot, or maybe a second, depending how the voting goes. So that's going to be tough for those people on that list. Um, and then if we get to the builder category, which rotates every 3 years, so they do refs 1 year, they do coaches 1 year, and then kind of everybody else who's in the builder category. So this year it's coaches. Only 4 people made the final ballot, which is very interesting because the final ballot could be, I think, if I remember correctly, up to 10 people. So only 4 coaches made the final ballot, which means candidates can only vote for 2 total choices. And they are Clive Charles, the great coach from Portland um, College, the University of Portland. Lothar Osiander, who's coached at all levels, coached, won an Open Cup title with an amateur team, I think one of the San Francisco teams, then got involved with coaching our national teams and our Olympic teams, um, and coached in Major League Soccer. You got Lincoln Phillips, who was the longtime great coach of Howard University, especially back in the 70s when they were a powerhouse and won NCAA titles, and Pia Sundhage, who took over the women's national team program and led them to World Cup and Olympic titles. So, really, really tough for those 4. And I could see any one of those 4 being in. Again, for sentimental reasons, only because I remember him tremendously from a coaching thing I went to before, and followed a lot of what he did. And then he got, you know, died much younger than he should have due to cancer, as Clive Charles. That would be my sentimental pick, absolutely. My dark horse would probably be Lincoln Phillips, for all the great work he did at Howard University. But again, I could see any of those 4 actually make it. I think this is the strongest category, and it would be a shame that 2 of them don't, at least this year, don't make it into the Hall of Fame. Doesn't mean they can't in a future year, but don't this year. You have any thoughts on the coaches?
To be honest, I only really am like extremely familiar with Pia Sundhage,
Yeah.
just because she's more recent. I guess I just kind of come back to the same point. Like when compared to the way every other sport in the United States does their Hall of Fame voting, it just seems very silly to me that they like intentionally limit the entrance each year. I guess it's just such a broad category, like they feel like they have to, or else it would quickly become like untenable to have all these people. But if they deserve to be there, they deserve to be there. Like I don't, in baseball, it's not like, oh, we can only have X number of people each year. It's like, here's the people on the ballot. It's a yes or no type thing. And so that just seems silly to me. But yeah, like you said, any of them, I think I could see being they would all be deserving, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, for the Soccer Hall of Fame voting, you select up to 10, kind of a yes or no for up to 10. And then they count how many ballots you were on. So who's ever on the most number of ballots with a yes would get in, as long as they're on at least 50% of the ballot. So we have had a couple of years in Hall of Fame voting since they've been using this system where it didn't, I think there was one year where we didn't get any players, maybe. I can't remember what it was, but we didn't get people because the vote was just split all the way around, because not enough, it didn't meet the threshold for entrance. So we'll see how it goes. We should be hearing soon-ish, where they start doing the videos where they surprise, especially the players, and let them know that they have been selected. So those videos, as soon as all the voting is in, and they tabulate the results, they'll go out and do those videos. I think around September, October, maybe we usually start seeing those videos, and people start getting announced, or some kind of personal announcement where they surprise them, let them know that they have been nominated into the Soccer Hall of Fame. All right. Well, that whole Soccer Hall of Fame got me thinking a little bit, especially over this week, and looking ahead to more things that we are trying to do with San Diego Soccer History Society, is not maybe all the way to a Hall of Fame yet, maybe someday, but starting to generate some top 10 kind of lists of players, teams, moments, matches, those kinds of things for a variety of different categories that we can start getting out there and letting people debate on who might be some of the best players ever to come out of San Diego. And there's all kinds of categories we can do. But to start off, since we are just getting into the college season right now, and we plan at some point over this season to start looking at least one of our colleges and the history of soccer there, we'd like the listeners and our viewers to start thinking about what are maybe some of the top 10 players from San Diego colleges, that attended college here, or some of the top 10 San Diegans who went and played college elsewhere. What are some of those players? And just try to get some representation from our region. So, Dylan, I'm going to toss it to you. I know you don't know that many people, but even what little we've done on the show, any names that you would toss out for any kind of top 10 list that we might do for San Diego? Right now, we're just going to start getting a gathering stage, and then we'll get some people to debate the merits of them.
Well, I know Mr. Eric Winalda would probably be.
There you go, Eric Winalda.
And then I could be wrong about this. Shannon McMillan went to one of the San Diego schools, right?
She did not go to a San Diego school, but she was a college player, as most of the women were. We have, some of our males went straight into, academy type programs, sometimes over in Europe or with our national teams. So they didn't directly go to a college. But almost all of the females that came through, or have any connection to San Diego as a youth, played at the college level somewhere. So Shannon McMillan played in Portland under Clive Charles, the one who I said was my sentimental pick for the coaches ballot. And she is one of those players who speaks incredibly highly of Clive Charles, as do I think almost every player who ever played for him. He coached both the men's and the women's team there over in Portland. So, and I think I know we have had quite a few other San Diegans go to Portland as well. Portland, UCLA, some of the bigger schools that people have gone to from the San Diego area. But yeah, Eric Winalda, we did our three people, right, who had the connections to the 1990 World Cup: Marcelo Balboa, Eric Winalda, and Chris Sullivan. But I'm sure there's a lot, so we won't try naming a bunch of them right now, but that's going to be a homework assignment for our listeners to start submitting some of those, and we will start gathering them for a project we're going to put together in a little bit. All right. Any questions or comments, Dylan, about any of the stuff we've talked so far before we get to the trivia question that we left everybody with at the end of our last episode?
I hope that someday we can look back on CJ Fodry's career and include him in this top 10 San Diego college players list. And that's a good segue for me to bring up that I will hopefully get to see him play this upcoming weekend. I'm going to visit my friend in Portland. They're playing Austin, and we're going to the game, and I'm hoping to wear my Loyal jersey and get CJ's attention before or after the game and maybe snap a picture or something. But he did technically play 1 year at San Diego State, so he could be eligible.
He did play 1 year, which also brings up an interesting question. If you're doing college soccer players, does that mean they just have to attend college but they had a great career after college? Or are we talking about they just had a great career like during college?
That is a good question. We don't need to make
that decision, but
sure, yeah, something to think about.
He only played 1 year at San Diego State. Is he eligible for?
It was a damn good year, though. He was a top prospect.
A very good year.
Yeah.
Actually, segueing from what you just said, that's one of my other housekeeping things before we get out of here is that just as a quick reminder, I'll make another reminder at the end of the show, but we will not be doing an episode next week on the 1st, specifically because Dylan is going to be out before we get back. So we will be skipping a week before we come back on the 8th to resume our weekly show. So just a quick bit
Hanging
of
out with my good
housekeeping
buddy CJ Fodry.
That's right. Definitely a good excuse to miss the podcast here. Okay. Let's get to our trivia question. Sorry, I must bring this up. Our question that we left off last time was, this former Jaws player made San Diego his home in 1980 and was inducted into the Cal South Hall of Fame in 2015 for his contributions to youth soccer. Dylan, I don't expect you to know this one, especially since you're newer to San Diego. We are talking about the San Diego Jaws back from 1976. And then he returned 4 years later in 1980 to make San Diego his home. As we find lots of people do once they get a little taste of life in San Diego, they come back and make their home here. But I'll give you the opportunity in case you did any research or anything else. Do you know or have a guess of who this player might be?
I had nothing. No.
Yeah. This is a harder one unless you're closer to my age. And especially if you grew up here, you might be familiar with this name or attended one of his soccer camps because they were quite popular, especially in the North County when I was a kid. And that is John Napier. He is the Northern Ireland international who played one of two, I think, who played for the Jaws during that first season. One of the more solid players for the team who, again, even after 1 year here in San Diego, eventually made his home here and made quite the name for himself at the youth level, at all kinds of age groups, both genders, at the high school level. His list of trophies that he won with his teams is immense. And he's one of the names I don't think that as many people know, because he did sometimes the younger teams, more like 13, 14-year-olds a lot, and not necessarily the under 9 teams that were playing for national titles or at the college level and so forth. But anyway, someone who I think still lives here in San Diego. Last I checked, was still here in San Diego. So John Napier is the answer to our trivia question. And again, tying in the San Diego Jaws, because tonight we will do our 5th installment of our series on the San Diego Jaws, which should be our penultimate episode. Should be one more after this, and we'll be wrapping up this series. All right. Couple birthdays for the week on Wednesday. So we record this on Tuesday. It's Tuesday, the 25th of August, 2026. On Wednesday, August 26th, we have 2 birthdays. Mercy Ikede, the great Nigerian striker who played for the San Diego Spirit. It's her birthday on Wednesday. And Rachel Bueller, the Torrey Pines graduate who is also a standout U.S. women's national team defender. Her birthday is also on Wednesday. So happy birthday to both of them. And, focusing on, especially on our women's side, leads us into our news and current events. And again, we had a ton of things we could talk about. I'm going to limit it just on the women's side because we had some big news on the women's side. The first were the call-ups for the Under-20 World Cup, which right now looks like it's still going to go on despite the threats of boycott from UEFA. But we had 2 local products who grew up and played here that made it into the Under-20 team. That's Lizzie Bawama, played at Albion for club and then at Stanford, still at Stanford right now, and Pearl Cecil grew up in Encinitas and is currently at the University of Virginia. So both of them made the Under-20 team in a bit of a surprise, also at least locally. San Diego Wave products, Kimmy Escanso and Melanie Barcenas, both did not make the under 20 team. Not quite clear if that was due to coaches withholding them, because that was certainly an issue with the under 20 team, or they just elected to go with other players. But little surprised that those two did not make the under 20 World Cup. Dylan, thoughts?
I I don't follow the college game closely enough to really know, but yeah, I mean it is pretty common for coaches to withhold players, and I feel like fair or not, um, the like youth teams are even more susceptible to that because the coaches kind
Yes.
of view them as just like an ancillary thing. So, um, yeah, I wouldn't read too much into it. I'm sure they would have loved to be part of it, but they're also playing professional soccer already, and so I think they both, might be okay sticking around for that as well.
Yeah, agreed. Usually the youth World Cups do not have the same priority or level of release or mandatory release for those. The other bit of news in NWSL, Scripps Ranch High School alum Sam Staub reached an NWSL milestone of 150 regular season starts. Staub has been anchoring the Chicago Stars back line for a bit here, and unfortunately, I guess great milestone for her, but not the best season the team is having right now over the NWSL Chicago. Um, really kind of sitting towards the bottom there, and frankly, haven't as an organization look in a little bit of shambles, but. Other than that, shout out to Sam Staub for reaching that milestone that I think fewer than 20 other players in the NWSL in its history have reached that level of 150 regular season starts throughout their career. So, congratulations to her. All right, Dylan, you ready for our trivia question before we get into our main segments here?
Sure.
Okay. All right, this is going to really be hard. We're digging deep on this one. So this future soccer star would score the game-winning goal to defeat the Jaws in the final match of the 1976 season. So I will give you a hint, Dylan, because I'm sure you don't have much of a guess here. It's not anybody we've ever talked about before on any of our podcasts. But if you follow the Sockers, you will recognize the name, especially when they started in '78 and through their indoor seasons. And we will give the answer to that question at the end of our fifth segment here on the San Diego Jaws. All right, so with that, Dylan, you ready to get started here on our fifth segment?
Let's dive in.
Okay, well, once again, welcome to the fifth installment of our series on the 1976 San Diego Jaws as we continue to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the team and its impact on the wider San Diego soccer community. When we last left the Jaws in our fourth installment, they were sitting in last place in the Southern Division of the Pacific Conference with a 2-5 record, but we're about to embark on an 18-day stretch with no league games. On the footballing side, Coach Derek Drevis said that they were going to use this time to work on their offense, which they badly needed to do. And on the marketing side, the club was going to use this time to help strengthen its ties into the community, especially the youth soccer community. Now, the whole reason for this 18-day break was for the 1976 NASL Bicentennial Tournament, because why not? Everything revolved around the bicentennial in the summer of 1976. The Bicentennial Cup was a 4-team invitational tournament, capitalizing again on the 200th birthday celebration of the United States, but also an attempt to boost soccer in this country. 3 international teams were invited: Brazil, England, and Italy. And a 4th team, a Team America team within there to represent the United States. Now, Team America sounds like it would be some form of the U.S. men's national team, but it wasn't. Instead, the Team America team was an NASL All-Star team made up of some of its best players, very few of them actually being U.S. citizens. So you had star players like Pele, Bobby Moore, Giorgio Chinalia, and other NASL stars representing Team America, and a couple of Americans in the NASL actually on the team as well. I'd just like to make a quick editorial side note that it's really good to see in researching this that interrupting a league season for multiple weeks in the middle of the season for a completely made up tournament just has such a long and rich history in United States soccer. So, before we get back to the Jaws, Dylan, any comments you have on this?
No, I'm ready to dive on in.
All right, this tournament was pretty well attended for most of the matches, but the Team America team would not win any of their matches. And if we look back at the Jaws, no members of the last place San Diego Jaws were invited to participate on that Team America team, which was probably a good thing for head coach Derek Travis, so they could have his full team available so they could work on improving the offensive side of the game. Also, in some good news for the NASL, the league reached a 3-year TV contract with CBS. The first match that was going to be televised was going to be the upcoming New York Cosmos and Tampa Bay Rowdies match. Tampa Bay was the defending champions from 1975. Of course, Cosmos at this time had Pele, so big, marketable game. And that was going to be on that first weekend in June as all the teams got back to playing a regular league schedule. Now, we're going to talk about this a little more in our final episode in this series, but just to kind of give a little more context to this TV contract with CBS, this is not like CBS was showing games every weekend of the NASL. It's not like CBS was even showing one game every weekend on the NASL. It was that CBS had the rights to show a game or two or more if they wanted to fit it into their schedule. So it was a TV contract, but it wasn't like the NASL was regularly appearing on CBS during the season. In fact, just spoiler alert, they would only appear on CBS 2 times for the entire season. But like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about that in the final episode. In terms of community outreach, so back during this 18-day break, of course, the Jaws are working on the footballing side, but obviously as a club, they are taking advantage of this time to get out and work in the community, strengthen their connection to the community, especially in terms of youth soccer. But they were doing a variety of things, not just during this 18-day break, but also out of this 18-day break into the summer, like helping promote the local muscular dystrophy campaign. Their player were doing appearances at local businesses, especially if they were doing some kind of weekend sale. There were player clinics, and then the plans getting ready for upcoming clinics and camps over the summer. They were helping KPBS with a fundraising drive they were doing that was around sports, a sports auction. So they provided a Jaws soccer ball that was signed by Pele for part of that auction. And again, as a side note, would absolutely love to know where that soccer ball ended up and where it is now, if it even exists. But a San Diego Jaws labeled soccer ball signed by Pele would be a cool item to have. And then they were also doing other community events like they did in preseason. And one of the ones they wrapped up this 18-day break with was going back to the South Bay, going again to Montgomery High School, where they had an indoor competition again between Montgomery High School team and Southwest High School. Both their soccer teams did a little indoor scrimmage. They also had a couple of local schools that had teams into the scrimmage. They again show the Pele's World film. People who attended got to meet Jaws players, and a big part of this last push was to get people to come back out to the season as it resumed, especially the first home match, which was going to be a Friday night matchup, June 4th, with the St. Louis Stars. But that would actually be their second match after coming back from the break. First, they'd need to travel up to Portland for an away match against the Timbers. Now, the last time these two teams met was just prior to going on this 18-day hiatus. San Diego lost at home to Portland 2-0. It was at that time San Diego's third straight loss and third straight game where they failed to score a goal. Now, in terms of Portland, the good news for the Jaws is that for some reason, even though we just had this 18-day hiatus, that the Timbers are currently plagued by injuries. Their most recent one is to their goalkeeper. Now, this match is coming up on a Wednesday. The Monday before, the goalkeeper strained his back in practice and is doubtful. So they'll be playing a reserve goalkeeper for the match. And Coach Derek Trevis says, we've taken the 18-day break. It's given him a chance to reevaluate the personnel he has on the team and also work on their attacking options. And he's hoping in this game against Portland to see an improvement. So San Diego travels up to Portland, one of the better teams in the league at this point in the season, and San Diego wins. They stun the Portland Timbers 2-1. Paul Scaridi nets the winning goal in the 63rd minute. The Jaws improve to 3-5, and now they're returning home in 2 days' time to face the St. Louis Stars, really hoping the momentum of this win against Portland and the work they've done, during this break to really get a good crowd and keep this momentum going with the St. Louis Stars. So one of the things that Derek Trevis talked about over that 18 break was evaluating his personnel, and clearly there was some negotiations going about player acquisition because right before the St. Louis game, it was announced that the newly acquired Irish forward, Hilary Carlisle, was signed to the Jaws, and he was going to get his first start on Friday against the St. Louis Stars. And fortunately for the Jaws, he seemed to be the perfect fit. San Diego would go on to beat the St. Louis Stars. They'd win 1-0. Carlisle would get the goal. Alan Meyer would have his third shutout of the year. Jaws now are 4-5, and just like that, the Jaws are one game away from improving their record to 500, and maybe an outside shot if they can keep this run going at the playoffs. So they have a week to prepare for their next match against Boston. The Boston Minutemen. I love some of these old NASL nicknames. But the Boston Minutemen, and they go to Boston with high hopes and get trounced by Boston 3-1. By all accounts, it's an easy victory for Boston. San Diego doesn't show much of an attack, even though they score, which again, any goal you score in regulation is good for some of the bonus points in the NASL scoring. But they, after 2 good games that they played, they travel across country and don't get it done against Boston. Their next match is against the Tampa Bay Rowdies at home. Tampa Bay, as we said earlier, defending champions from 1975. They also have the best record in the league coming into this match. So the Jaws have been hyping up this match. They're really hoping for a crowd. They're expecting upwards of 9,000 people in Aztec Bowl. Now, I never got a final tally on what the attendance was, so I don't know if the expectation was met or not. But Rowdies come to town, and San Diego, by all accounts that I've read that I can find on this game, play their absolute best game ever, but was not enough because Tampa Bay still beat them 2-0. Tampa Bay's goalie, by, again, multiple accounts, came up with at least 3 fantastic saves to keep Tampa Bay ahead, preserve the shutout for the Rowdies. The Soccer seemed to have, again, by the accounts I was able to read, good control of the match. But when it mattered On those key occasions, Tampa Bay was able to get it done and San Diego was not. And this match really seems to be a pivotal point in the season. Coming out of this break, they win their first two matches. They kind of slip up in Boston, but they come back to San Diego. They play a fantastic game, but still lose to the best team in the league, but still lose 2-0. And for the rest of the month of June, they don't win a match. We won't go through all the details of each match, but they finish the month of June having lost 5 straight and are now, clearly in the basement of the Southern Division of the Pacific Conference with a 4-10 record. And that month of June also, I don't know if it's because we had the bicentennial celebration around the 4th of July and that really dominated what was going on locally. But as we get into July, the news coverage definitely changes in our local papers, especially in the North County papers and the South Bay papers, which had been very friendly to the Sockers. And from the footballing side, we won't go through all the games, but if we kind of look through July, the Jaws actually go 4-3 through the month. It's the only month that they have, if you just look at a contained period of time, where they actually had a winning record. And by the end of July, their record is 8-13. They're playing better soccer, they're scoring, they're obviously winning more. But in the papers, the coverage is lacking. And it really, kind of what happened in June seems to have taken an effect. Also, some other bad news for the Jaws in a bigger long-term picture is their leading goal scorer, Hillary Carlisle, who they brought in, starts scoring early. He suffers a broken jaw in the match with San Jose during the month of July and is out for the rest of the season. He ends up finishing the season as the leading goal scorer with only 5 goals, but he had 5 goals and 2 assists in 11 games and really seemed to be the key to part of this turnaround in the month of July, but it really wasn't getting covered very well locally in the papers. And when we talk about the coverage deteriorating, it wasn't just the quantity of coverage, it was also the quality of coverage. There were many times going through, when I was going through our local newspaper articles, where there would be things like an article about this game coming up on Friday and all these details, but the headline for the article says Jaws to play at home on Saturday. Or you look at in the sports for the day and where the Padres are playing and as we get later in the summer for Chargers preseason or something. But then for the Jaws, it would say there is a game on a particular day, even if they had the day right, but they were playing at Balboa Stadium when the match was actually at Aztec Bowl. So little things like that certainly didn't help them. But even still, their attendance improved over the course of July and towards the end of the season. But they seem to have lost the coverage they were getting. And that's going to play into part of the narrative of them leaving. As we know, this will be their only season in San Diego. And we'll cover this in more detail in the final episode, but this plays into the narrative of them leaving to Las Vegas. Eventually, we get to August, which is the end of the regular season for the NASL. And on August 13th, the final match for the Jaws is at home at Aztec Bowl. They get, I don't know if this was their best crowd of the season because I can't get attendance for all the matches so far in the research, but this one is reported to have 9,400 people at Aztec Bowl. They were facing the Minnesota Kicks, which was the other team that relocated at the beginning of the season. So remember, the San Diego Jaws were originally in Baltimore. They were the Baltimore Comets. Then they moved to San Diego. And then the Denver team, which now I'm blanking out on their mascot name. I'll remember it in a second. Denver moved to Minnesota to become the Minnesota Kicks. So these two relocated teams finish the season, the last game of the season, playing each other. Minnesota does win the match 1-0. When we finish this segment, we'll give the trivia answer to the goal scorer for that. And then that was it. They finished in last place. They were far removed from the playoff line. It was obvious in July that they were not going to have any chance of making the playoffs, even with their run and in doing a bit better in the month of July. But there was still talk about the Jaws and what was going to happen and how things were going to change for 1977. Were they still going to stay in Aztec Bowl? Just lots of um, questions around the team or improvements to be made around the team, but nothing really out there publicly about the possibility of them moving. In fact, right after the season, the Jaws are doing some clinics, especially head coach Derek Trevis is doing youth coaching clinics as a lot of the youth leagues are getting ready to start, which is something he said in the papers that he absolutely loves to do because figures the much wider impact he can have if he can train more coaches who can go out there and train players than if he just does a coaching clinic with a handful of players. So he really liked doing these coaching clinics. But even while the organization's publicly talking about next season in San Diego, we'll find out, and again, we'll talk about this in the next episode. Talks are already underway behind the scenes about moving the team to Las Vegas for the 1977 season. And again, we will pick it up from there and cover that final chapter of the San Diego Jaws in our final episode of this segment, when we'll air it in 2 weeks here. So, Dylan, now that we've gone through that, any thoughts or comments before we do our usual epilogue for this particular segment on the San Diego Jaws?
Yeah, a couple things. As you pointed out, some very interesting mascots. Denver Dynamos, I believe I saw the note as
Yes,
well, was the name of the
Dynamos
Denver
it
team.
is. Thank you.
Which, if for no other reason for an alliteration, I can appreciate that. It is interesting to see some of these historic teams that are still around in obviously different capacities and ownership structures. But it is cool, like Portland, Seattle, Tampa Bay. It just kind of
Yes.
goes to show how historic some of those clubs are. I gotta say though, Hartford Bicentennials and Minnesota Kicks are two of the worst ones I've heard. Those Bicentennials, I get it just for the time, but like that would so rapidly not be an interesting name.
Right.
It
Yeah.
feels a little bizarre. But then I also had a question. Like you mentioned that and maybe we'll get into this in the next chapter, but that the media's kind of fall off in coverage fueled the narrative about the team ultimately picking up and leaving. But I guess my thought is like, to what extent was the coverage always going to drop off as baseball season approaches and football season was coming? Because that still happens today, right? Like the broader sports media kind of is done playing with other sports when NFL comes around.
Well, yes, we are going to cover this more specifically the next episode, and without giving too much away, the argument by the Jaws was San Diego's a crowded sports market. It was hard for them to get coverage, get press, whatever. But if you look at the teams, not only the ones that were successful, but certainly the ones that are also successful and the ones that had deep ties to their community still today, some of the teams you talked about, Portland Timbers, the Seattle Sounders, right? Tampa Bay Rowdies, that these names, and even though it's not technically the exact same club, but have kept the name and carried over and kept that momentum going. These are also places where the local media made it a priority to cover these things, no matter how well the teams were doing. It was a priority to cover because, frankly, even doing some of this research on the San Diego Jaws, it's easier sometimes to go to the visiting team's papers to get information because it just wasn't covered very well in San Diego. And I'm probably going to leave it just at that because, like I said, we'll hash this out a bit more in the final episode. But that was, the coverage did kind of drop off, but it seemed to be a choice, where other locations made an obvious choice to treat this as an equal to the other professional teams that they had. And you could possibly make the argument that we had Major League Baseball and the NFL here in San Diego, and not every NASL city had that. But the areas that made the soccer team a priority in their sports page, I think that also helped create those strong connections to the community, because people were reading their local paper and the local paper made it seem like it was important. And that really, if you compare different cities, that really didn't happen in San Diego. There were individuals who tried to do the coverage at various times through the season, but it didn't hold up. And sometimes there would be a big article lead up to a match and then no follow-up article ever on what happened in San Diego and what happened in that match in some of the papers. So I think I think how the local media chose to treat the NASL team went a long way towards the overall success of that NASL team.
Interesting.
All right. And I can't remember if you had another question. Was there another question?
No,
that
was the main question. Yeah.
Okay. So like I said, we'll cover this a bit more and with some different context as we do our final episode and look at the legacy of the Jaws. But as we kind of do our normal epilogue here, we did mention that Minnesota Kicks and San Diego Jaws were the two relocated teams, not truly expansion teams, but relocated from other areas because they weren't doing well either at the gate or the ownership strike, whatever it was. They weren't doing well, and the league chose to move them, which, that's what we do in American sports is we move them. Interesting to note the drastically different trajectories of each of those teams. San Diego was originally the Baltimore Comets, who finished in last place. They came to San Diego, finished in last place. There wasn't much of an improvement year to year. San Diego didn't have any big name draws. There was no George Best on the team. There's no Pele. There's none of these top players really that had any kind of name recognition played for the Jaws. But the Jaws still, drew pretty well. Their attendance was pretty good. They ended up finishing, I think, overall like 12th in the. Actually, let me find it. I have it down here. They were the 10th best attended team of the 20-team NASL at 6,152, but there's a huge range there. Seattle was the best attended, and that was 23,828 was their average, and Boston was the lowest at 2,581. So quite the range of different areas, but it wasn't terribly attended in relation to the entire league. They started to get competitive over time, but they did struggle. And you look at Minnesota on the other side, that moved from Denver and became Minnesota. Now, Denver, before it moved, was a mid-table team. I think they came third of their 5 teams in their division. They moved to Minnesota and they ended up winning the division. In fact, Minnesota Kicks were the runner-up to Toronto for the 1976 championship. So very different paths those two relocated teams took, which also showed a little in the standings. Minnesota was one of the well-attended teams in the league. If we look at the standings for the Jaws, they finished 9-15 overall, so 9 wins, 15 losses, which gave them 82 points, because remember our crazy NASL point system that they used, which put them last in the Southern Division of the Pacific Conference of the 5 teams. So there's 4 total divisions spread around the country, each with 5 teams in them. But they were not terribly far out of a playoff spot, only 27 points, which today would work out to be, probably closer to 10 points on a more traditional wins, loss, draw kind of record. The Southern Division of the Pacific Conference was pretty competitive relative to other divisions. And if we made a single table, the San Diego Jaws would have finished in 15th out of the 20 teams. So they were playing in a tougher conference. Um, but the thing that killed them, like right off the bat, I think it killed them a little bit in their ability to market themselves maybe to a more broader audience, because the soccer people were certainly showing up to their matches. And maybe to get better news coverage was they couldn't score in the beginning and they just weren't winning any games. They had the worst, even how they finished through July, they were the worst offense in the league with 29 goals in 24 matches. They had a 16, all teams had a 16 player roster, and they ran through a total of 24 players throughout the season, including, as we had a trivia question on one of our previous episodes, 8 forwards, which is unusual for a team, but they just couldn't find a scoring solution. As we said earlier, Hillary Carlisle led the team with 5 goals, right? That was the team leader for the season, but he did that in only 11 matches. He joined after that 18-day break and then broke his jaw, and was out. So as things, seemed to start clicking in July, you lose your best attacking option. Their goalkeeper, though, Alan Meyer, he led the league in saves, which, good or bad, right? Always when your goalkeeper leads you in saves is not necessarily a good sign of your overall defense, which was the team's strength in the beginning of the season, was their defense. But Alan Meyer led the league in saves with 218 and probably also helped keep games closer than they might have been otherwise. And I think that's it of the kind of the big picture of how the season went. But even though they did not do a stellar job in footballing terms on the field, they really did start to make some strong connections into the soccer community. And we'll get into this a bit more in the final episode. I think this is really where their legacy is. It's not what they did on the field, but it's the seeds they planted in the year they were here that really helped a lot of local soccer take off, youth soccer take off. And of course, we know they go to Las Vegas for 1 year and then they're right back to San Diego again and rebranded as the San Diego Sockers. And it's a completely different story once they come back as the San Diego Sockers compared to the San Diego Jaws. So, like I said, we'll pick up all of that on our final episode of our series on the San Diego Jaws. So, Dylan, any other thoughts or comments before we fully wrap up this segment?
Yeah, I did just want to say that if you completely ignore the totally bonkers point system, 82 points would have seen the San Diego Jaws win the 1975-1976 English First Division by 22 points. So that's worth something, I guess.
It is a bonkers scoring system, and it just, it's one of those things. This story is a perfect kind of encapsulation of how soccer for 150 years in this country has continued to be here and have fans and get people to show up for games in spite of all the leaders in soccer trying to change the game in some way, Americanize it in some way. And if, it's like slowly people are learning, but it's taken more than 100 years, that if you just play the game and treat it like the rest of the world does, a lot of the other stuff will take care of itself. Like the handcuffs we put on professional soccer and other levels of soccer in this country, because we don't think Americans can handle the way someone else does it, or the other way around, because we're American, we think we can do it better, is just astounding to me. That, to me, I think there's a strong correlation between the rise of soccer in this country and people appreciating soccer in this country to us becoming, as a country, more in line with the world's game and not trying to change the rules to make it popular to some mythical fan that's out there that doesn't really exist.
I say this fully recognizing that this comment bears absolutely no relevance to the world as it stands today. But this is a good distillation of how American exceptionalism actually leads to a worse outcome. Like feeling the need to be different, be better, quote unquote, ended up setting the sport back half a century or more.
Yeah, I think that's certainly something Americans have historically a hard time accepting, that somebody else outside of America might be doing something better.
Again, absolutely no allegories to the modern landscape in the world.
None whatsoever. All right, let's go ahead and answer our trivia question that we left at the beginning. Let me go ahead and get it back up on the screen. This former Jaws player made San Diego, oh, sorry, that was the wrong one. Let's try this again. All right, this future soccer star would score the game-winning goal to defeat the Jaws in the final game of the 1976 season. So we just saw it was the Minnesota Kicks playing San Diego here in San Diego for that final match. Dylan, I won't even ask you to guess because I'm sure you'll have no idea, but maybe some of our listeners out there might. But I'm going to go ahead and get it up on the screen. It would be future soccer star Adi Coker, who was great forward for both the outdoor soccers and in the indoor game for San Diego. But Adi Coker had the game-winning goal for Minnesota against the San Diego Jaws in that final match. Okay, that wraps up our part 5 of our series on the San Diego Jaws. We have a couple closing things to get to before we wrap up the show. We don't always do this at the end, but we have a couple in memoriams to do at the end of this episode. One is we're recording this on Tuesday, August 25th, as we said earlier. Just a note that yesterday, August 24th, isn't really a person, but for a team. But San Diego Loyal, it was the 4-year anniversary of the announcement of their dissolution as a club, or that they would be dissolving at the end of the, 3-year anniversary.
I was going to say,
would be dissolving at the end. Yeah, I had in my mind from something earlier about trying to do something next year on the 4th anniversary, but that was still in my mind. 3-year anniversary of the announcement that they would cease operations at the end of the 2023 season. Our other one is actually a person, and tying in loosely to our Jaws story, since they eventually become the San Diego Sockers. On Thursday, August 27th, is the anniversary of the death of Ron Newman, the Hall of Fame head coach for the San Diego Sockers, first with the outdoor team, and then transitioned with them into the indoor team and led them to the majority of their early indoor championships. Okay, and then another quick thing, we had talked last week, Dylan, you and I did, about the 2027 US Open Cup qualifying tournament. I don't think they've done the draw yet. I think it's a little later this week, but the first round is going to be the 12th or the 13th of September. So people might want to mark that on their calendars, and we will see about trying to get out there to attend a match on the 12th or the 13th of September, which I think for this qualifying tournament, they are frequently on the weekend. I don't have the dates.
That is a weekend. Yeah, that's a Saturday, Sunday.
Unlike when we get to the Open Cup proper, because of all the seasons that are going, it's usually done midweek. But a lot of times these qualifying tournaments are done on the weekend for these amateur teams. All right, so that is a couple of housekeeping things. And then just a reminder that San Diego Soccer History is brought to you by the San Diego Soccer History Society, a grassroots organization looking to uncover and preserve San Diego's rich soccer history and culture. And if you like what we're doing, please help us spread the word. Like and subscribe here on YouTube to help get these videos in front of other people's eyeballs who might be interested in San Diego soccer history. You can engage in our community section here on YouTube. Follow us on Blue Sky at sdsoccerhistory.org. And if you like San Diego soccer and history and want to help us out, please volunteer to be one of our team of researchers. And you can reach me at john@bigpinedigital.com by email. And I think we're getting close to our trivia question here. Is there anything we're forgetting, Dylan, that you can think of?
I don't think so. I think we got it all.
All right. So again, hope everyone enjoyed this week's episode on our series on the San Diego Jaws, the 5th installment of our series. And please join us in 2 weeks when we return for our final installment and close out our series on this 50th anniversary of the 1976 San Diego Jaws NASL soccer team. Normally, at this point, this would lead us to our trivia question. But because we're doing the Jaws again, and we've done a lot of Jaws trivia, I'm a little bit tapped out on trivia for the Jaws. So instead, we are going to give you a little homework assignment back to our housekeeping at the beginning of the show, and try to come up with some top 10s in any kind of category revolving around soccer in San Diego for a future project we are trying to put together here at the San Diego Soccer History Society in terms of college soccer. So again, it can be players who attended San Diego colleges, San Diego players who went to college somewhere else. We'll figure out what kind of categories we want to do once we start getting some more names in. But start sending in and give us your names for consideration so we can eventually start putting a pool of players together from which we will have our listeners chime in on who they think are our top 10, we'll say. Maybe it'll be more or less, but top 10 players in a variety of categories relating to college soccer. Okay, Dylan, since no trivia question here, any final thoughts before we head out today?
Well, I will try and do my homework as well. That's
right.
all I have to say. Yes.
Yeah, I will share some names, but clearly we've covered some very obvious ones on the show that we will start our initial list with. Some of them we mentioned already, but anyone we've already mentioned through our variety of episodes, we'll get them on the list, and we'll see what other names come in. I, because I'm a graduate of San Diego State, am way more familiar with people who've come through that program than I am through USD or UCSD or Cal State San Marcos now, or even our junior colleges. So if anybody out there is definitely attended one of those, or you knew someone, great player in high school that went on to do some good things in soccer at the college level, it doesn't need to be anything beyond that. We want to get their names in our pool. So please send us our lists. Again, if you didn't get the email address before, if I can get it up here on the screen, you can send those to me at john@bigpinedigital.com. You can reach out to us through Blue Sky at sdsoccerhistory.org. Or if you have any other way to contact us, which I know a lot of you out there do, you can send us any of your candidates for our top 10 list. All right, so that wraps it up for us. Don't forget to send in your candidates list. Don't forget that we are taking a week off next week, so no show on the 1st of September. We will be back on the 8th of September to wrap up our series on the San Diego Jaws. So with that, we'll see you next time on This Week in San Diego Soccer History. Good night, everyone.